Hi, my name is Harry O'Neill. I'm at the other university in town, University of Southern California, but also part of the Crest family. It's my pleasure today to introduce our keynote speaker. Notes requiring glasses, that's what we're working on here. His title is Executive Director of STEM at the U.S. Department of Education. And he's got two major responsibilities: overseeing policies to drive innovation in STEM and enhance interagency coordination. That's herding cats, for those of you who are in that business. Sorry. This introduction turned into a bigger deal than I thought. Sorry. No problem. Well, we do need the speaker's slides, so that's the important part of it.
Yes, which they're on a USB drive out in the hall right now.
Imagine, wonder. Oh. Well, maybe I can consider go on with the introduction while the technology is catching up with us. Russ is a retired Navy captain. If you're in the Army-related fields, that would be a colonel. He's been a program manager at a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, also the Office of Naval Research. He's taught at the Air Force Academy and also the Navy Postgraduate School. You can see his trouble keeping a job over the years. His intellectual interests that relate to this particular conference is in the area of games and STEM and also in the medical area. Virtual reality, particularly in the area of post-traumatic stress. And he's been dealing with Sesame Street Workshop and looking at trauma of kids, particularly of people who've been, their families are overseas deployed. If you see me passing things to Russ, we're keeping track of time, obviously, and has to keep so there's enough time for questions at the end. So further ado, Russ?
Well, a little bit more ado because we still need to get my
Oh, there's more ado? Okay.
Well, good morning, and first off, I'd like to thank UCLA Crest for having me here. Eva Baker and Harry and the entire gang at UCLA have been quite the set of mentors for me over the last several years while I was in DOD and now that I'm at the Department of Education. There we go. Thank you. So hopefully today this will be fairly coherent. I hurt my back on Saturday, so I've been convalescing for the last few days. And was just making some adjustments to my slide before the conference, which I'm sure none of you have ever done in your careers. But what I wanted to do today is actually challenge the group for the upcoming conference to really think beyond your comfort zones. It's something that as a DARPA program manager, I had pushed my performers to do, including UCLA Crest. And you'll be hearing some of the work that we did, hearing about some of the work that we did in the coming days. But the entire area of STEM is of high priority to the Obama administration. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the Department of Education and how basically I ended up transitioning from DOD over there and why. And a big chunk of that is on the innovation agenda. Now we've already been hearing some things on equity today. And to me this is one of the most disturbing charts that I've seen since I came over to Ed. I actually got a memo that was on my desk this past week that basically read 71% of white students have a full range of science and math classes. Only, what's the number that I'm looking for? 60 or 57% of black students do. So I scratched that and I said only 71% of white students have a full range of access, and it's even worse for minority students. Because all of these figures are really unacceptable at this point. We should not have only all students in the country really need to have access to a full range of science and math education. And I think that's a technology solution in part, not in whole, But there's a lot we can do out of our collective learning and technology to help bridge this gap, I think. And again, this is another interesting set of stats. So, while 78 to 83% of the schools serving the lowest percentages of Black and Latino students offer chemistry and algebra, 66 and 74% serving the highest percentages of Black and Latino students offer chemistry and algebra. So it really is an access issue. It's an equity issue. Even though I don't have statistics today on rural America, that's a huge problem as well. So we have a huge mission ahead of us. And I really call on everyone in the room to really start thinking about not just how we can do things better in the classroom, but then scale them into these areas where we do not have access currently. So, how did I get here? Basically, I was a DARPA program manager before I came over to Ed. I was a Navy captain, for those of you who knew me before. But even earlier, I was building video games when I was in graduate school to test children's hearing acuity. And so in the mid to late 80s, I was building touchscreen computer games to do psychoacoustic research on kids, which meant for the military that when I joined, I must have been a simulation expert. So that's I became a training and virtual reality expert almost overnight. But moving ahead, basically, how many people have heard of DARPA? So most of you. But I think it's important for us to think of DARPA here, and it's been part of my message over the last year. And that's that DARPA was formed to try to prevent strategic surprise and to keep us ahead of, every other nation on Earth militarily. We need a similar set of thinking for education at this point. And we need the type of program implementation that DARPA actually provides. And part of that, and you'll see this in some of the programs this week, is really having a multidisciplinary approach and bringing people together who normally don't work together and bringing people into the field who have not really looked at the field before. So getting fresh eyes on the problem. And DARPA basically has been doing this since the late 50s. But while I was in the military, some of the other military programs were very influential, and really one of the main reasons I jumped and retired out of the military was my 5 years working with Sesame Workshop. We basically put together a series of programs aimed at helping children cope with death, with injured parents, and with being deployed on regular bases. And the immersion for me basically started making me wonder why we didn't do education and training differently in the military. But it also outlined to me that really the problems with training and education in the military wouldn't be solved until we actually addressed pre-K and beyond. And so I was more and more disturbed by that fact. So it was finally time for me to say, okay, it's time to do something else and change roads. Now, one of the things on the DARPA programs, which are interesting, is that they're moonshots, really. So they're not like the way NSF or NIH or IES structures programs. They put a large amount of money behind doing something that's very difficult. And that's different from the way we fund just about anything else right now. What you'll hear a lot about DARPA is that really DARPA is all about technological risk. That's not really true. It's partially true, and it can be true, but really it's approaching big ideas and tackling them en masse. And so, one of the visions that I had when I came to DARPA, and it's evolved since then, of course, was, the whole vision of Neil Stephenson's Diamond Age. And could we actually build that? So that's actually a DARPA-level problem. And what I came to the conclusion between my PTSD programs and my ED programs was that actually we could make a start at doing this. And so we started breaking it down. So what would it mean technologically to build something like Neil Stephenson had envisioned? And where are our gaps? So you look far ahead, and then you start working back and identifying gaps and issues that you need to tackle. is although many people think it's applied research, it's basic research, because you're doing a lot of things that nobody's done before, and the basic research isn't there to support much of what you do. So what it is it's iterative basic research to an applied end, which is also different from the way we actually fund other programs today. One of my inspirations was, and you'll hear from Zoran Popovic this week for Fold It, but that was basically crowdsourcing a microbiology problem and using the wisdom of the crowd to solve problems. The Engage program though at DARPA, and again you'll see some of the fruits of that this week, basically was saying let's actually crowdsource the pedagogical process. So if we create games and have tens of thousands of students play them, can we get them to basically evolve into optimum pedagogical strategies for the student? And so it was basically a big data project looking at optimizing approaches towards things like teaching fractions as it started out. And you'll hear some things from Crest. UCLA Crest was one of the main performers on this project as well. And since I'd had a long stint of developing video games in the military, I wanted to do it properly. So basically, develop a video game approach that adapts educational gameplay, but it has to advance pedagogical research. I wanted things that were modular and open architecture that we could grow and build on. We wanted to partner with top university of experts, but insist on having professional game developers in the mix. And basically look at also non-cognitive issues. And I'll talk about that real quick shortly. One of the programs you won't hear about out of this program that we put in is a program from Carnegie Mellon Robotics Academy, which if you haven't seen it, it's cs2n.org. And it allows kids to actually program and learn to program Lego and Vex robots in virtual space and in game space, even if they don't have the robot. Or if they have a robot, the class can prototype on the virtual environments in the games and then run it on a real robot. It comes complete with all of the teacher training activities that you want, and so it's really a complete package. And to use a dirty word from earlier today, it was MacArthur Badges certified. So. Okay. The first venture, though, we had with between DARPA and the Department of Ed while I was there was on an SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Project. How many are familiar with SBIR? About half of you. SBIR is actually, every time research is implemented or funded in the federal government, by law, a certain percentage has to be allocated for the Small Business Innovation Research Funds. And that's basically available for small businesses, but it has to have a research component, so quite often the small businesses partner with universities and other entities to get the project done. So it's an interesting way to do innovation research, and it's basically not as constrained by the requirements process and other things that the bigger programs are. So it's a good way to get started. And if you make it into phase 2, you're talking about around $1 million for the development costs. So we put this one together with Intific, basically to combine comics and video games. So Looking Glass is something that is, I'm told, ready to be seen, but it basically is aimed at women, getting women into computer science. And it combines comic book stories with video game gameplay. And after that, getting back into the PTSD world, we started creating, in the same SBIR programs, graphic novel art therapy tools to allow service members to tell their stories and learn to tell stories about their experiences in combat. And in fact, Alan Gershenfeld, who was one of the ex-presidents of Activision, is with a company now called Eline Media, and they're developing an example comic for this project that allows you to hear modern combat stories in the context of Odysseus. So that should be coming out very soon. And here's a second set of comic book tools. But I started thinking about how can we start doing more using comic books in STEM education at that time. The one thing that I would put forth to you today, and a big part of my philosophy is, most of our educational games today do not tell stories. At best, they tell a meta story of some kind, and we're missing huge opportunities in developing games that do not tell stories. Because if you really want to get the so-called non-cognitive or social-emotional learning aspects into your games or into the educational strategies, game storytelling is essential. And that is one of the reasons we developed the Looking Glass game, was that we figured that that was the best way to actually put storylines into an action type of a video game. But there are many ways of doing it. But I really stress, as you are putting together your games going forward, think about the stories that you can tell to increase perseverance and grit and academic mindset and whatever else you would consider a priority. So I retired in February 2014. Here I am, the blue one, by the way. I can't believe they actually built a uniform. I haven't changed much in the last year and a half since I left. So here's our San Diego Comic-Con panel. And so one of the things I'd also put out to the audience here is we are talking games a lot. But what I've been calling for the last couple of years is a push towards a comics for impact movement, similar to the Games for Impact movement. Comics are an excellent way to teach. They are actually a different mechanism of teaching, probably tapping into different neurological mechanisms. And so bringing comic developers together with educators and scientists would really be an interesting mix. There's some good materials out there already, but it's something we could really improve on if we applied the same models for comics that we've been using for games. And so that would be on my wish list, Gurley. Going forward. At Ed, it's been interesting. We did not have a STEM office prior to a year ago when I got there, June of 14. And you can see I have an enormous staff now of 3 of us. And this will be even funnier when you see what our mission is. But our latest addition, if some of you may know Melissa Moritz, who came to us from Teach for America. And she's handling basically most of our teacher training issues now out of my office, while I'm concentrating on technology and the innovation agenda. Ellen Letvin comes from the Pacific Science Center, and she's our expert on informal education. And so if you get a chance, look these folks up. They're really good. Our extended team, though, is spread across the entire agency. And one of the first things that I did when I got there was really start pushing the ARPA Ed. So you'll see an article I wrote in Scientific American in April discussing this, but really it's doing what I just described, trying to develop a 10-year vision of what we would like STEM to look like in a blue sky environment, and then working backward to, I thought you were giving me a warning.
No,
So.
I'll raise my hand.
Yeah, but then working backwards from there to look at what the policy problems are, the technological problems, and the research problems are to get there. And so basically trying to employ a DARPA strategy to look at STEM education. We are still trying to get ARPA Ed approved. It's been in the budget for the last few years. Honestly, I'm not optimistic, but I also don't give up easily for those of you who know me. So I'm still pushing this very hard because I think, you know, NIH, NSF, IES do great work, but there are different tools that do different things for research. And an ARPA Ed is actually a unique tool that can do unique things for us. And again, it's education moonshots and really taking those big bites of problems and doing a all hands on deck approach to solving them. And my personal philosophy is a lot of what's holding us back in education research is that we're taking too small of a bite out of the problem. And we really need to have that bigger connection between the basic research process and the advanced and applied research process. And right now, I think there's a disconnect. So we are doing a 10-year vision. I won't go through all of this, but I will put out a call for you. So far, out of 3 working groups, I've been having very small working groups doing this. Some of the things that have come up have been to think about, instead of scaling the way we typically think of things in education, of multiplying the same process over and over, think of it in terms of Chris Deedy's propagation ideas about developing things that can be applied and adapted by in learning environments. Alternative research models, interdisciplinary research teams, real-time formative assessment and more teacher support, and reduce stovepipes between STEM topics, and really think about the equity and access issues. And so one of the things I would call for, and what we're in the middle of doing now, is I'm asking people to write me emails pretending that you were walking into a classroom in 2015 and you tell me what you saw in this wonderful classroom of the future, and how it was different from the way things are done today. And so if you could look at some of these issues, we may actually use some of these in our final report, because I really want that vision out there of what we would like education to be in an ideal world, so that we can actually plan for it, rather than, you hear people talking active learning, okay? That sounds great in a report, but what does that mean? How do you implement that? What does that look like? And so what I would like to do is put some meat on the skeleton that we've kind of created, and actually come up with a real vision that we can all at least understand. And if we're wrong, but it gives us some place to shoot for. And I think that's what we're lacking right now in a lot of our education thinking. Here's my STEM Ed Tech agenda. I won't go through it very quickly because I've already hit most of these. And in fact, I'll go on because I'm sure I'm about to get hear the music. Part of our mission in the new office, though, is the federal organizations, so the Committee for STEM, and it's really broken up into these groups across the federal government. P12 STEM instruction, which is primarily teacher training and pre-training. Engagement, undergrad, grad, and equity are all major parts of what we're looking at, and have different committees on the federal side. My office is actually co-chairing with NSF the P12 STEM instruction group. But the whole federal list of partners is here, so I won't read them all, but it's a large group of folks, and they're all funding things in STEM education in various ways. And so part of what we're doing is talking about how we're analyzing and working across these different agencies to actually validate what they're doing and seeing what the impact is of some of these programs. I'll actually skip through this because I've hit most of these, but these are our main STEM office strategies. Interagency and interdepartmental focused collaborations, communications and outreach. External partnerships, so we're really working beyond federal government and working with 100K and 10, Change the Equation, and STEM for Us, and all of the private STEM outreach groups. And then again, really looking at best practices for STEM education, and looking for things that can lead to breakthrough education or innovation. Here is an abbreviated list of the programs at Ed that currently offer STEM as a priority. Doesn't mean that we actually have STEM funded in these programs, but it means that if you applied using a STEM theme, you could get funded under all of these programs right now. And I'd like to point out arts and education, so even though we don't use the word STEAM, we do have an arts and education program that does have a STEM priority. But you'll see it's really a wide swath of different programs down there, and a lot of these you're familiar with, and including special education research grants. So as a parent of two autistic boys, really one of our goals in our new office is really looking at equity issues to include special needs of various kinds. Here's the IES STEM grants. This might be interesting to some of you. So this is how we break down in the Institute for Education Studies for what they're funding overall. And in the green, you'll see what is a STEM priority set. What I would like to see, and what you'll hear me say in just a second, is really I'd love to see that early learning side bump up there a lot. And that's, I think, just going through real quick because I am running a bit long. Most of you are probably familiar with math and science partnerships, but it brings up an interesting question when people ask us to fund specific things. Most of what we're funding are formula grants to the states, and math and science partnerships are one of those. So if you're interested in funding for math and science partnerships, going to your state representatives is critical. and we can actually be assistants to help hook you up there.
You have 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm doing good then. 21st Century Learning Centers, this is something fairly new and very exciting. So Ellen Letvin, my informal specialist, is heading this up out of our office along with other offices in the department. But basically it's a federal government collaboration study. So ED's funding along with NOAA, National Park Service, and IMLS, 3 different programs this year to do citizen science types of studies for kids. So in the Park Service, I think that's one of our big winners. It's heavily in outreach, doing heavy outreach to Native American students to get them out doing citizen science in the national parks and things like that. So really trying to come up with collaborations to get students in with NOAA, NASA, IMLS, and others to leverage our interagency assets. Ellen is also working on something that I don't really have time to discuss, but really looking at the whole STEM ecosystem issue and looking at individual areas to figure out what schools can and cannot leverage in their areas to improve STEM education, both in the informal and formal environments. Again, the heavy reach for me from West Virginia is how do we extend some of this out into the rural areas of West Virginia and Appalachia in general, where the STEM ecosystem is a bit thinner than in other places. Investing in innovation, most of you are probably familiar with this. This is one of our discretionary grants, so we do put out regular funding here, but it is still woefully small for the amount of interest that's in the program. But it allows you to do innovation research at various levels with the goal of actually being able to scale the research. Teacher Incentive Fund, we just had a master teacher convening. We never have gotten the full White House vision of master teachers funded, but we have been working out of our TIF, Teacher Incentive Fund, to do some small studies along the master teacher model. Ready to Learn, this is one of the, my happy notes for the year. The competition is closed and they should be announcing soon who won these, but we do have a STEM priority now in Ready to Learn for PBS, well not for PBS, but for television productions, including places like PBS and others who've been performers in the past. So not just math, but really the STE in STEM is what they are looking for. STEM and interlearning, so as I wrap up, this is my big call for the day. This is where we know the least. So STEM in the early learning set, I really want, before I leave the administration, to make some headway in early learning in STEM. We need to be catching kids as early as possible instead of trying to win them back to science and technology and math in middle school and high school. So the goal is never to learn to lose them in the first place, never to learn them in the first place, never to lose them in the first place, and keep them excited about STEM throughout their education, and that means starting in preschool. So we are going to work, at least we're planning on some work with Cooney Center on an NSF study that will look for what we do and do not know in best practices in STEM, especially for the STE parts, which I think I already know is woefully little, and then look at what our research agenda needs to be to actually fill those gaps, and also make recommendations about what we can implement today. The other thing we've been working with is with OSTP, talking about to media outlets of a wide variety of media about their portrayals of STEM and how they're showing STEM in popular media. So we're really taking an all-hands approach to this. This is the big thing for since I was a research program manager for all of those years, this is my big thing. IES produced last year a very nice study that they published from a working group on coming up with best practices in early learning for math. Love the report. We've been sending it out. I think it's very useful. The part that we're really short on right now, though, is this part. And that's that if you look here, the levels of evidence for the 5 recommendations are moderate, minimal, 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 and minimal. And even though the What's Works Clearinghouse is very strict, our goal shouldn't be just to identify those. It should be to figure out how we're going to bring those moderate and minimals up to strong evidence. And
it's not just STEM education that this is a problem on. We really need to be doing a better job of, in the military we have a requirements process where when we identify a requirement, then we have to identify research funds to achieve it. So, we need to move these up and actually identify other best practices as we go along. And that'll be a big challenge for the early learning space. I'll close out just by a pitch here, since this is a lot of you are gamers. There is an Ed SBIR coming up. Our Ed IES SBIR program has funded a lot of successful games so far. They are more than willing to come up with good ideas. In DARPA, when I did them, they were very targeted. I would ask for a specific type of game and get them back. Ed and IES do it a little differently by calling out for basically a very, very general approach. So if you have really good ideas, this is a good place to fund them if you can partner with a small business game developer. And here's the information. So we've got basically another call coming up here in the fall. I highly suggest you apply if you're interested. And Ed Metz is our program manager for that. And he's very receptive to new ideas. So with that, thank you. Sorry to such a fire hose, but